present Tim Standing from OWC Media and MacSales, two allied companies. Tim's the Vice President of Software Engineering at OWC. He works to develop software for the Mac OS system. He's been writing storage drivers and applications for the past 3 decades for products such as Avid Media Composer, Avid Unity, and products like AdaptTech and for Apple. For the past 15 years, he's been working on a product called SoftRAID that is incorporated into the OWC drives. And I've been using SoftRAID for 2 years now on my RAIDs, and it's just totally bulletproof. So what else can you say about a RAID protection system that is bulletproof? So my compliments to you.
As Jim said, I'm a software developer. I've been working on storage drivers for 3 decades. And I wrote SoftRAID. I wrote the Mac OS 10 version 15 years ago. I've been improving it ever since. But contrary to what you might think, I'm actually not going to talk about RAID today. Instead, what I'm going to talk about is using other people's experiences with disk drives to improve your experience so that you don't get stuck with a dead disk drive at the wrong time during a post-production edit or something like that. So just like using a seatbelt, when you get in a car, you put your seatbelt on, and it's not because you've actually personally experienced having an accident where you could have gone through the windshield, or that a friend has done that. It's you read articles, you read studies, you hear about studies, and you know that somebody else's experience, so 1 in 10,000 experience or 1 in 100,000 experience, influences your behavior. So what I'm going to talk about today is that same sort of type of thing. We're going to talk about other people's experience and how that can influence your choice so that you're not stuck in the middle of a project with a dead disk drive having to do a RAID rebuild right when you're on crunch time. So the first place to look is the large companies that are have huge numbers of disk drives. You know they're buying from different vendors. Google, Facebook, Backblaze, Apple, all of them are collecting statistics on what drives are reliable. And all of them, with the exception of Backblaze, consider it proprietary information. Backblaze has taken the unusual step of publishing every quarter the failure statistics from the previous quarter. So they are now like at 65 or 67,000 disk drives. They'll tell you what the percentage of the actual number of disk drives that they have, what vendor each drive came from, what size, how old it is, how many of them failed. So what I recommend you do before you buy a disk drive, if you're going to buy, say, 8 6 terabyte drives, go and download their latest statistic, look at 6 terabyte drives, and figure out which ones they see are failing least. They publish this every quarter. All you have to do is Google Backblaze space disk space failure. It'll come up. It's a blog entry. They have some other interesting things about disk drives. We tend to track what they're doing because we're really interested in what's going on in the industry, and we're interested in other people's experience and how that can help our users. So this is the failure rate graph that everyone knows and sees. You've seen it, I don't know how many times before. It's sort of, you take it as gospel, right? There's a certain amount of early failure in the first 6 months of a disk drive, and then they're pretty good from 6 months to a year and a half. They're going to work pretty reliably, and a year and a half in, they're going to start failing. The failure rate goes up, and it's sort of what you're expecting. Well, imagine that it was a car that you bought, and the first 6 months of a car that whatever model car it was, everyone knew there were early failures, right? Everyone would be up in arms. But we as consumers just sort of accept this for disk drives. We say, oh, this is fine. This is what we expect. Well, I think that it's not quite the way things should be. I think actually what's going on is the disk drive manufacturers, they manufacturing these drives, they can't, to actually test a 6 or 8 terabyte drive would take 2 days. Rather than having those drives sit in their factory for an extra 2 days, it's much more economical for them to ship you the drive, and you're going to test it for them, right? And then when it fails, they're going to, 6 or 8 months later, that 1 or 2% of early failures that we're seeing here on the left, you're going to ship it back, and you think, oh, well, I just got one of the duds, or it just failed. You won't even think that. You just think it failed early. and they'll send you an RMA, a refurb drive, and you're happy. But I think actually what's going on is, and this is based on what our customers see, is there's actually a latent problem in the drive 3/4 of the way through, halfway through. You don't know it. You buy the drive. You start using it. It looks great. You start putting some data on it. A month in, you've got a terabyte on it. Everything's cool. You really trust the drive. It's really reliable. 2 months in, it's a third full. Everything's still fine. Now you're starting to really trust it. It hasn't given you any hiccups. Boom, 6 months in, you finally hit that part in the drive that can't store data reliably. Okay? As soon as you hit this, you're in that position where you've got 6 terabytes of data on it. If it's a RAID, you might have 24 terabytes on the volume. And now you've got to deal with the headache of replacing that drive, doing the rebuild. If it's a single drive, you've got to do the restore from backup. You're sort of in this precarious case, right? If it's a RAID system, you're down one drive, you don't have the fault tolerance you had going in or that you're expecting. So what we suggest instead is you do what we call certifying the drive, which is basically an exhaustive test of every single sector on the drive. And in SoftRAID, there is a feature called Certify Drive, and it basically will write out a random pattern to the drive and read it back and verify it. And it does this up to 8 times. The default is 3, which is what we recommend. The last pass always writes zeros, and the reason for that is my friends at Drive Savers, the people who do data recovery, say that it's much easier to recover data if the whole thing is set up with zeros first. So we write zeros at the end. So this is, in the first part of the second pass, a 6 terabyte drive takes about 46 hours. And people go, oh my God, 46 hours, I'm not going to be able to use my RAID box for 46 hours. My answer is it's much better to do this incredibly rigorous testing, take 2 days to do it, and then know that that system is going to be reliable rather than skipping the step. Now the cool thing is it takes 46 hours to do one drive. It also takes 46 hours to do 8 drives. Right? They can all go in parallel. You hook up 2 like Thunder Bays with 4 drives each, or even some of the hardware RAID boxes, you can turn them into JBOD mode, and then just run SoftRAID, do the certify, and at the end of it, your drives are reliable. What we find is that the drives that fail early on, that fail certification, are either refurbs that you get returned from the manufacturer, or drives that are in the early part of production. So there was a certain brand of 6 terabyte drives where we were saying failure of roughly 30% of all the drives that people were certifying. Another brand's 8 terabyte drives had the same sort of problem. So if we're back to our graph now, and you can see what the drives are that are failing early on are all these ones that if you certified them, you wouldn't see. If you certify your drives first, your failure graph is going to look like this, which is a hell of a lot better. Right? This is something you can live with. So let's take a quick aside to SMART. SMART is this technology that the drive manufacturers they developed sort of in unison. It's unfortunately not a standard. It's sort of voluntary adoption. It's a technology the drive manufacturers put into the disk drives. The idea being the drives could self-diagnose their problems. So you tell it to go do a SMART test. It goes and does these tests. And it comes back and says, yeah, everything's cool, don't worry about it. So the problem is that if you were a drive manufacturer and you were going to put in a test and people could return the drive if it fails the test, would you make it actually work really well? No, of course not. So what we find is that the SMART test itself is pretty useless. A drive really has to be incredibly sick before it fails SMART. Usually it's so sick that for other reasons that it's not usable. It might be reading at 10 megabytes a second rather than 200. It might be making funny clicking noises. All these things are things that a drive is going to do if it fails SMART. We have at the moment 22 unreliable drives in our office. 2 of them fail SMART. The rest do not fail SMART. Okay? So the cool thing, though, about SMART is they also came up with this list of what they call SMART attributes. And SMART attributes are parameters that the drive reports back to the computer that are things like how hot is it, how many hours has it been running, how many reallocated sectors does it have, how many times has it been powered up. And the idea was that users and manufacturers could collect all this data and look at it and sort of say, oh, this is why the drives are failing type thing. Well, it turns out most of those are pretty useless. People thought, oh, if drive runs hot, then it's going to be unreliable. It turns out that's not the case. My previous career was as a biochemist. And as a biochemist, I read a lot of papers. And this is something that still happens. I still read a lot of papers. And in 2007, I came across this really cool paper by Google engineers. And what they did was they took all of the, at the time, 100,000 disk drives that Google was using, and they collected the smart parameters from them every 24 hours. And they did this for 8 months. And every time a disk drive disappeared, they'd get in touch with the tech who was responsible for it. And they'd say, did that drive disappear because the drive failed or because the little server module it was in failed? And if it was the drive that failed, they go, chick, they put it on a list. And they went back at the end of 8 months and crunched the numbers. And they looked for smart parameters that changed in the weeks or months before that drive failed. And what they came up with was out of the 50 or 80 smart parameters, 3 of them had a really high correlation with drives failing. And they're the 3 right here. So number of reallocated sectors, that's pretty obvious. The drive figures out a sector can't hold magnetism, so it uses one of its spare sectors instead. Unreliable sectors are ones where the reading from the magnetic material is not quite strong enough, but it's not so bad that it should be reallocated. And the last one is uncorrectable errors, when the drive actually could not read the data and could not correct it. So if any one of these numbers goes from 0 to 1, then the drive is 20 to 60 times more likely to fail in the next couple months. And my feeling is when a drive is gets to this point and one of these flags comes up, it's time to move it out of there. You know, it doesn't cost you that much to go and get another drive. You get advance notice the drive is still working, but it's on its way out. Here is a drive that I have. It pops up. It sort of went into this mode where you'll notice it has 20,000 reallocated sectors. It's obviously on its last gasp. It adds 150 reallocated sectors per hour of use. I use it only for demos because I'm afraid it's actually going to fail completely. So it's a really good, about half the drives that are getting, are predicted to fail have this number of reallocated sectors. The other half have like 2 or 3. OWC is unique in that if you buy your Thunder Bay from us and one of the drives is predicted to fail, notice the drive still passes smart. Okay, would you trust your footage on this? No, of course not. So OWC is unique because if you get a drive like this, we'll RMA it and replace it. Most of the other vendors will not because they say it's got to fail completely. Well, we worked out with the manufacturers a deal where we can actually get them to give us replacement drives in this case. So if we go back to our original graph here, you'll notice that I have here that 75% of the drives are predicted to fail before they actually fail. This is not a made-up number. This is actually what our customers are seeing. So 75% of the people who have a drive failure, the drive is predicted to fail before it actually fails. So you can then, say you're in the middle of crunch time, you can actually schedule time. So you order the drive, you certify it, it takes a couple days, you wait for your editor to take that long needed 10-hour break where they're going to go home and get a shower and sleep. And you can actually schedule your rebuild then and do a RAID 5 rebuild. Now SoftRAID, because it's actually using the processor in your Mac, can do a rebuild with a 6 terabyte drive in about 6 to 6.5 hours. On a hardware RAID box like a Promise R4 or something, or R8, that same process would take about 40 hours. So we can do that because we use all the cores in your Mac, and when we're doing the RAID calculation, we do it incredibly quickly. So this is what your failure rate is going to look like without, when you take into account the predicted failure. These are the drives that are going to fail without any warning. So SoftRAID's been around for 20 years. There's a demo on our website, softraid.com. You can download it. It's full featured for 30 days. If you just want to certify drives, you can download SoftRAID Lite. That's $49. If you want the whole shooting match, including RAID 4 and RAID 5, that product is $179. Unlike the hardware RAID vendors, we also allow you to have 2 enclosures plugged into the same Mac Pro, so you can have 2 Thunder Bays with SSDs in them. it'll give you a read performance of about 2.3 gigabytes a second on RAID 5 and a write performance of about 1.6. Thank you.
Now, I've never gotten one of your emails or telephone calls, but there's self-diagnosis.
Yes, there is.
Diagnostics in the SoftRAID.
If you gave me 45 minutes, I would have gone through the whole thing.
But that's an important thing to say.
Well, okay, so I didn't know it was supposed to be a product-focused talk, so I gave a more general talk. There are some really cool features in SoftRAID, one of which is that you can set it up really easily to send you email notification whenever there's a predicted disk fail or disk fails completely, all sorts of possible error conditions. And you can set it up to send an email to your tech guy so that when you're working, he gets the email and he has the drive ready for you when, so you don't have to think about it.
That's really cool.
And it all runs in the background with the SoftRAID monitor, which puts this little indicator up in the top thing. So when a drive is predicted to fail, it goes yellow when there's a real problem, like the drive fails smart, or it starts getting read-write errors. That's in red.
Thank you so much, Tim.
You're welcome.
Great presentation.